close on your camera being canceled. Yeah. Okay. Your camera Alright, folks, we are ready to start. We have everyone quiet. Assuming you folks are ready. Floor is yours.
Before I begin my speech, I'd like to thank a couple of important people and organizations in my life. The first one is my parents, who have supported me since 6th grade for starting off and pushing me into this activity. And I eventually fell in love with it, so I'm thankful for them and their continued support. The second is the tab room and all the people working for this tournament. It was really well run and one of my favorite TOCs. Third is our coaches. There are a lot, He-Man, Fred, Arjun, Enough, Brian. I couldn't have done it without you, but maybe most importantly, Scott, this is my 8th year with him now. And not only has he changed, my argumentation, taught me so much about debate, but he's shaped my life in a great deal too. Thank you, Scott. Our school, our principal, Ms. Kress, who supports the program. Our competitors, McDonogh, it seems like we're always in finals. That's great. And Rom, our 4 years have been characterized by eventful ups and downs, but I know I couldn't have been better. I couldn't have had a better GA. All right. The advantages family planning. Adequate U.S. funding for UNFPA is critical to global family planning efforts and making existing efforts more effective. Every dollar has a quantified impact. Best data agrees. PAP4. UNFPA promotes reproductive health in world's poorest countries. U.S. funding shortfalls. Support for the UNFPA has been unreliable, and Reagan refused to release funding because the agency was complicit in human rights abuses. Human rights abuses in China. The Clinton restored funding and condition on no funds to be used in China since 1990. U.S. contributions have been reduced by the exact amount the agency spends in China. The president determines involvement in coerced abortion based on broad interpretation of laws to determine the UNFPA's presence in China could be involved in China's coercive policies. Family planning advocates that have been working solely organizations that directly participate in coercive practices with U.S. funding. This would prevent UNFPA from being punished. None have found evidence UNFPA has been complicit. UNFPA's presence in China has had a positive impact, helping promote voluntary family planning because of the U.S. opposition contributions have been kept in a separate account every year. Women and families suffer the consequences. Every $34 million with help from the U.S. could prevent 2 million unwanted pregnancies, 800,000 induced abortions, 4,700 maternal deaths, 60,000 cases of illnesses, and 77,000 child deaths. U.S. contribution represent 12.5% of UNFPA's total budget. Trump's defunding move is because of China. This affects global family planning efforts. Passed at 4-3, the Senate Department invoked the Ken Castro amendment, which ensured the taxpayer the dollars to help fund organizations that support coercive abortion. UNFPA does not provide abortions. The organization works in China to break reproductive health voluntary. Trump did not explain how to determine the UNFPA. While it violated U.S. law, the UNFPA no longer provides financial support to the Chinese government. Jimmy Trump's will pull $76 million, 70% of its budget. Our problem is that with the Chinese, why are we taking it out of 149 other countries? It's not doing anything to punish the Chinese. It's hurting women and families around the world. UNFPA is the best institution for global family planning, empowering women in reproductive health. Comparative studies prove it has the best data organization and leadership. However, resources and track one efforts are still needed. Look, UNFPA will need resources to operate. UNFPA made a huge contribution to Chinese population data collection capacity through census for surveys and support for health service connected with and NPFPC. The expertise sits in government-level research institutes without parallel and responsive policymaking counterparts. Policymakers should be supported by stronger evidence-based research. Is not well integrated. There's much work to be done to together population-generated health research to improve policymaking. UNFPA could play a leading role in organizing forums to bring the various constituencies together. Migration organization, sex ratio. UNFPA's contribution to China's analysis expertise remains the largest contribution, playing a similar role in the next period. Will be a huge contribution to China coordinating social sciences needed to support evidence-based policy-making. Research and data that exists as scattered, not brought together for policy-making outside. It would be important to establish reproductive health at a higher level of government. Chinese family planning needs are still unmet. At 11, 1/3 of women had an unmet need for contraception. Not many resulted in high incidence of unplanned pregnancy and abortion. Premature premarital sex is still censored by society. Murder women undergoing abortions are still often shunned and criticized. Consequently, abortion may lead to social isolation, psychological distress, and sexual dysfunction. Unmet need for modern contraception is associated with reduced access to SRH care. There's an urgent need to increase access. Hundreds of millions die and more suffer due to lack of reproductive health services. China alone accounts for 20% of this. Susia, 20% of the world's women live in China. UNFPA approved programs in China promote voluntary use of family planning to allow couples to freely choose their sides of the government. UNFPA replaced mandatory birth control with good counseling and informed consent, reducing the range of contraceptive and higher quality services. 800 countries are targeting quota systems throughout China. It is vital for the U.S. to continue funding cost effectiveness and benefits of the UNFPA. This funding prevents 187 million unintended pregnancies, 60 million unplanned births, 105 1.5 million induced abortions, 22 million spontaneous abortions, 2.7 million infant deaths, and 215,000 pregnancy-related deaths. Cost-benefit analysis conducted by the UNFPA found spending $3.9 billion could prevent 52 million unintended pregnancies, 22 million abortions, 201 million would have unmet contraceptive needs, and these women would have family planning needs better, would prevent 23 million unplanned births, 22 million induced abortions, 7 million spontaneous abortions, 1.4 million infant deaths, 142,000 pregnancy-related deaths, and 505,000 born without mothers because the mothers died in childbirth. 55% of abortions in developing countries are unsafe. The plan, United States federal government should enter a binding international agreement with the United Nations Population Fund in which the United States agrees to adequately fund the UNFP operations in China, repeal the dollar-for-dollar withholding initiative, and clarify that UNFP operations in the People's Republic of China are not in violation of the Kemp-Claxton Amendment. Solvency. Certainty of U.S. funding is critical to ensure adequate budgeting and a more precise agenda setting, earning for shifting attitudes range from similar to diametrically opposite abortion policies and interpretations of Kemp-Claxton amendments. Predictive behaviors, while the program focuses on is supporting the countries who will reassess their commitments to UNFPA would be able to more actively foresee fluctuations because the previous expressed values and commitments regarding certain subject matter. Large member states like the U.S. have consistent ideals. The UNFPA can budget in more precise manner. Objectives are key in determining expectations of donor countries. The goal reiterates expectations each donor has well-established investing policies, sustain long-term relationships. Stability is a resounding theme, emphasizing the necessity of international cooperation in the UNFPA to attain full commitments to meet expansive needs in developing countries. The plan overwhelms decades of flawed signals, and absent the plan, the decency gap will reduce existing donations, earning for UN conferences sort of a direct and influential role in the international community in uniting and mobilizing countries. The United States must regular transformation of the United States status with an influential effect on the rest of the world. The U.S. could easily withdraw $34 million. Other large donors will follow this irresponsible pattern, frustrated by this unfair decency gap and refuse to uphold this large deficiency burden. Lastly is NGO reluctance, fear of reinstated anti-abortion policy to prevent adequate use of funds. Barat 15 and prevent future presidents from bringing the gag rule back or prohibiting disqualification of foreign NGOs from U.S. aid to provide health services but not use U.S. funding in countries where services are illegal. And if such services are also legal in the U.S., though high risk of global gag rule returning could lead to a rough cutoff in funding. Valuable partner organizations are reluctant to accept U.S. funding prospects for whether and how much the United States will contribute to UNFPA or so the U.S. firms still remain stuck in a pattern of pushing back and forth to support advances for reproductive rights. The global trend towards countries liberalizing abortion laws. It is incredibly important to learn about reproductive health services, especially for the youth. Bracken 13. At such a time, a young person needs to be in full possession of the straightforward and impartial facts. They have no need for judgmental opinion promoted by streaming interest groups. Few young people dealing with unwanted pregnancy will soon be in this position. They can only be in if their schools have provided them with a sophisticated nuanced curriculum and sex education. If young people are uneducated about pregnancy, it appears will be uneducated too, so the chances of getting any intelligent advice from friends are limited. Many are poorly educated. Many still view it as a perspective that places the young girl in an impossible position. If she gets pregnant, she's an idiot. It is her fault. If she has an abortion, she's doing something dishonorable. So much of what we say or do about abortion is indirect, inaccurate, whispered, euphemistic, and rarely explicit and frankly immature. It's fear, prejudice, ignorance, and intolerance. It has an impact on how we educate young people about abortion. We fail to provide necessary infrastructure to make it work. We fail to tackle the attitudes which impede proper provision. We fail to educate ourselves and others. We fail everyone. 47,000 women die each year as a result of unsafe abortion. 1 every 8 minutes. 13% of all maternal deaths on Earth occur because women who want to have abortion cannot get one. Preferred particularity, universalism limits the range of solutions, leads to irresponsible decision making, and is self-defeating. Zanati 17. Justify and address political decisions and ethical action based on universalism, supported by atomistic ontologies and the stifling limits imposed by substantialist structuralism. In a world of turmoil, talk of universal creative principles brings hollow positional ethics as best we can hope for. Ethical guidelines may not be grounded on abstractions stemming from the solitary ruminations of an individual's right and responsibility, because the need for exercising prudence and making truth statements about what is universally good. Assumptions about ontological properties yield two problematic effects. They may stifle political imagination. They could encourage actions based upon abstract prescriptions rather than upon careful diagnosis of the situation at hand, basing political choices upon abstract principles that treat what happens as collateral damage or ethically thin and politically dangerous, the result of irresponsible political decision-making that does not include a competent assessment of the practical configurations. Such attitudes have led to disastrous initiatives such as the invasion of Iraq. Devise viable solutions to specific problems. The massacres that occurred in Rwanda in the 1990s provide examples. This way of reasoning was also appeased consciousness for not making decisions accountable to the people in danger. Broader generalizations and reliance on abstractions threatens more self-defeating outcomes, failing to take into consideration specific historical configurations. Scenario analysis is pedagogically valuable. Barna 16, the quarter of developments of political sciences implemented one components of the generation of substantive research projects that actually policy rather striking little attention is paid to techniques. Scenario analysis can immerse decision makers in future states that go beyond intervention and extrapolations. The scenario analysis does typically seen as serving current planning as policy, yet is not inherently limited to these uses. We characterize scenario analysis as the art of juxtaposing current trends and unexpected combinations. Particularly surprising yet plausible features referred to as alternative world scenarios are explicitly not forecasts or projections based on linear extrapolations. They are not hypothesis-based expert predictions, nor should they be equated with simulations, which are representations of real institutions. Instead, they are depictions of possible future states of the world, together with driving causal forces that can lead to those futures.
We're going to take some prep.
Right.
Did you finish the podcast?
No. bipartisan market.
Stop rep 937. You ready? What's the 1AC's relationship to the political?
Well, the political is kind of just the investigation of what the world would look like if the government were to enact a certain policy. Or the plan poses the question, what would the world look like if the government were to institute this policy? And we think that the investigation of whether or not Chinese people should have access to contraceptives.
Correct. So this debate is a question of the education produced.
No. Well, not necessarily. We think the affirmative is a good idea, and if we win that idea, we should win.
So but that's winning the idea in terms of an educational strategy?
Yeah, it means that if the plan is a good idea, you should vote affirmative.
Cool. What is a family?
Well, a family in the context of our first advantage is all about, so the UNFPA kind of has certain guidelines on whether or not you can create a family, and that relates to things like abortion, contraceptive services, etc. We think it's
this organization, what is its definition of a family?
Well, family, I don't think it defines family. It defines family planning, which is, planning how you want to start a family. So that involves when you plan to create a child, how you sort of approach that.
What can be a family? Like what is not a family?
I don't think the affirmative. I don't think what a family means is really relevant to the affirmative.
Well, your one is about family planning.
Well,
so
but that deals with something more specific, which is access to contraceptives.
I think our authors would agree. Any two people who have a close relationship could be a family.
The point of the app is
it would be a consensual relationship.
The point of the app is to offer contraceptives to people or family planners in China?
No. Well, contraceptives are denied to women in China. The plan would give them access.
That's not. The plan funds the UNFPA. That we have read cards that repealing the policies designed to contain China that constrain the UNFPA's operations would allow it to conduct effective global family planning efforts. So that includes, sending contraceptives to local NGOs and to local governments, as well as directly working with communities.
And so effectively this helps as a population control method in China, or?
No, it is not population control. We have read evidence that suggests that the idea that the UNFPA is coercively trying to reduce the population or force abortions is false. It's a conservative strategy that undermines reproductive health care. Teaching people how to... So UNFPA actually doesn't even provide abortions. It provides contraceptives and education.
Sure, so the people in the 1AC have chosen not to expand their conception of a family.
What is that? What?
You offered contraceptives to people who want it. I'm asking you've isolated people who want to be able to engage in an act of family planning?
We just think that it's ethical that access to contraceptives should not be inhibited.
Who gets to plan their family?
That's irrelevant to the 1AC. Our argument is...
That's irrelevant to the 1AC.
There's a lot of people that currently don't. Our evidence says 187,000 mothers die every year in childbirth because they don't have access to that.
So the 1AC gives people the ability to control their family?
To some degree. I mean, control, if you want to define that.
The 1AC sent out one alternate case.
Do you have any specific page you want the case stuff on?
The advantage or the solvency, those are your choices.
Let's throw it on solvency.
All right.
Wait a second. Gotta add an extra.
Oh my god, I've been just saying that. I went to so many high school searches for like a college this season that in my first college in Kentucky, I actually kept saying that I was 48 and I would see your speech over and then just freak out and just stop. Yeah. Whoops.
That's why I'm sitting there. Maybe one day. Right.
So, I just need to...
All right, well, while you pull that up, I will start.
Yeah, you can start.
Thank you. So first, I just want to thank God for allowing me to have this opportunity to debate in the first place, putting me in the family that I'm in, and having supportive family and a sister who also encourages me. My parents and sister encouraged me a lot throughout the entirety of the activity. DB, I don't know if he's here right now. There he is. Not much needs to be said about this man, the enormous impact that he's had on making McDonogh JN what we are today. Straight up comes with the best strategies, cuts fire. We joke about how he's Dr. Dre in the studio, but I think it's kind of true. He's been with us from early Saturday mornings, Sunday mornings, Monday mornings. I mean, we've just been putting in a lot of work, and I just appreciate everything that this man has done for me. And especially teaching me about being a Black American. If it wasn't for him, I probably would not have known or been in the epistemological position that I'm in now today to make the arguments that I do, and I think I'm a better person for that. Callum, who's also coached us at a number of tournaments and here, had a major influence on all the arguments that we read. Niche, we've had a journey being partners. I know we look back at old videos of us sometimes and just cringe at how bad we were. But I couldn't ask for a better partner. Niche is hands down the best 2 in the country. Sorry, Joe. Of course, all the libraries we've had over the years, the McDonogh debate team that I've come up with, the McDonogh administration, and of course our opponents here today, Peninsula, for being able to have once another finals debate, as Jerry said. The tournament administration at the TOC for putting this together. That's it. So, you good?
Yeah.
All right. On off this.
It has been a long time and yet nothing has changed. We have a new president and still nothing has changed. A lot of people believe that some things have changed and that they're going to be better. No one in these old United States likes to take responsibility for the country they're in, but are much readier to beat up and teach up people in other countries. No one in this country wants to take responsibility for the thousands of Negroes who have been beat up, shot up, jailed up in this country just asking for some normal rights. Even though America says it's a democracy, must now be judged by its deed and not by its aspirations. Under democracy, more people have been systematically exploited. Today, what the Negroes are doing is exploiting all the myths that a Christian, freedom-loving, capitalist, democratic country can do no wrong. Democracy does not need freedom. Lynch mobs are made up of just plain old Christian-loving, freedom, everyday good Americans. This is a struggle to change the system. Each right that the Negroes win will help destroy your system. Any significant moves from now on must be a difference of the American system and the American authorities. Conflict with the whole country. We will have to get out in these streets and fight. And I do not believe that the temper of the Negroes is such that they will take more beatings and jailings just to prove that they are entitled to the things that they embody that everybody else has. The Black masses will either retaliate or they won't act at all, but the one thing that they will not take anymore is beating. There still is the myth that the American people are principled, good, law-abiding people when nothing could be further from the truth. Americans are the most non-law-abiding people, the least principled people in the world. America historically has been considered a democracy even though there's been fascism for so many millions. The American system must be judged on its record. And on its record, it is a system which any responsible historian will have to judge as having operated by race exploitation. These are the truths to which the Negro struggle is beginning to light. This is what philosophers should make clear. Because even though Negroes in the United States still think they are struggling for democracy, in fact, democracy is what they are struggling against. Here's hoping that both of us will weather the storms and emerge into the sunshine of a different society. Blackness manifesto in the rebar political discourse as grammars of something that undergirds civil society and other questions of political ontology and unspeakable in the intellectual meditation, the only ethical means of political discourse as the decision of the slave, the affirmative and substantive logical culture, larger institutional access without accounting for the political non-ontology, writers, Woodison, and Teddy, grammar suffering on the only ethical words of the model politics, modern logic, logic, the balance, and the matter, what's the best to think, acting, the world, the substance, the wood, are we to make a move that response to most exclusive meditation, acting, the balance, question, the political question, political ontology, their goal, unspeakable, and social meditation, those steps in their conviction are remaining discernible, mathematics, you for large, canonic, formation, even still maintain credibility, even by the this thing all in a simple side, no ethical standing in the presence of YC. A rubric of discourse practice manifests only the people are own to political discourse on outspoken garbage grammar. I'm antagonist on the monastic conflict the ontology of suffering, right? The political discourse is also in the political discourse assume an ontological grammar structure of suffering, structure of suffering that causes the structure of suffering regardless of the spirit of unity mobilized by the political discourse and question structures of ontology of suffering stand in antagonistic rather than conflictual relations to one another and the chaos ways in turns case these forms of violence were granted by the one to see are contingent operations that's for subjective or for the human because unlike the slave they're not ontology condemned to the condition of objective vertigo of life constituted by disorientation and disposition contingent violence is absent. Moving right life because the lack of conceptual frameworks to proceed by violence, which is a never-ending paradigmatic necessity that's ruled us in 11.
Subjective verticals are verticals, the event objective verticals are constituted by disorientation rather than an eye controlled by disorientation. The black is a sentient being, though not a human being. The box human disparate relationship response down to the heart of the player, incorporation now to the human substance contingent. Not violence against when he or she retains practical symptoms about the violence and paradigm of testing. Just a performed contingency be constituted by discipline by violence and control simultaneously by the subjective. And objective vertical is an indicated political ontology, which is radically different from the political ontology presented. Being who is constituted by discourse and discipline by the violence when he or she breaks the ruling of discourse of human. Revolutionary touch fear when they expand objective vertical because the most discerning and disoriented aspects of the life are induced by the struggles that arise from entering human conflicts with the black. There are no common massive conceptual frameworks for suffering analyzed with the meter massive framework, which explain the disposition of the human and the incoherence of blackness and societal down, which magnetizes the bullets and succumbs to good who is violence that makes civil society possible. All political calls for liberation press blackness to be coherent, which is the paradigmatic impossibility. This means any call for reform is but another way to reconfigure civil society and render incoherent modes of resistance. Wilson, in 3 black person works with the grammar of suffering in Germany, thirds of the world, incoherence of every sexual required having analyzed with the nation, subverting the narrative of every experience with the subject whom the nation has world was built in the analog, and this subject represents the same all analyzed by society up to direct relation and the level of real. First black is bullets by body will function as a magnitude of violence for which civil society is possible by the system has without heritage magnitude of violence in the program. Ultimately, disorder by civilization is cost for number should be no cost for disfall for true revolutionary backward shift to negative dialectical politics refusal and refusal to form a program. Ultimately, disorder the state of political movements in the United States space wide by the nuclear for Genesis. Gee whiz, if only backward could be more coherent or maybe not even come at all. And the U.S. is recently slammed by the UN on the human rights violations. There is an international spotlight over the slamming of the U.S. for human rights violations in the area of police violence and racial discrimination. Events targeting the black society is tarnished the U.S. and China among member states, indicating the deterioration on U.S. human rights. As sheriff in 2015, the United States was over human rights with the United Nations Human Rights Council country after the country recommended the U.S. regular legislation expanding training to eliminate racism and excessive force enforcement by law enforcement. There's an international spotlight that has been shown on the issues and probably the large events in Ferguson and the proportion of police violence response to even peaceful protests of tragic death have renewed a long-standing and critical national debate about the even-handed administration justice. The fact that we still don't have a reliable rational figure of how people are killed by police or what the radical breakdown of these people is a travesty. Evidence trying to targeting black sectors of the society have tarnished the U.S., Pakistan, Russia, China, and Turkey are among the most restrictive of the member states which are informing the U.S. that the human rights situation in the country is seriously deteriorated recently, and blackness is blackness as ontological becomes the muted bodies. There exists no history, no resistance, no family, no and only meaningless of violence that are abstract against abstraction that calls for the terror in the streets as Wilson intent by saying understand the plan of recognition violence that the person has repetitively reproduces black in the void of historical moment that is without analog in the serving dynamics ontology and the violence that turns the evidence to think without analog because it does not seem to be present back through its tactile and empirical technology to repression which violence of the black source ontological resistance medical has wiped out the history metaphysics and history custom and sources on where they were based African from 7 to humanities blacks and ontological resistance white men and IT community hiding against the black human being above all human being black human felt they were somehow the mediator only contesting the structural form of adjustment already that of African body equality 18th century slave narrative give voice to the emergence in the abject units of activity to the verdict for slavery ready the death of the African bodies and the force abstraction black authenticity is an oxymoron a notion of a rebellious property it requires the kind of ontological integrity which a state cannot claim structural adjustment imposed on black migrants is vital to well-being of society blackness manifests itself in an individual context of the field that has no social status but issues from specific historical discourse practices and aesthetics these specific historical discourse practices and aesthetics are homogenous that they might be in level content or homogenous in the sense that the genealogists cannot recognize and incorporate the fugitive slave or the card slave. Now the alternative is non-fugitive metamatic analysis that poses the question about the civil society's ethical distortion in 1030 the part of the essential unfugitive metamatic analysis the moving getting movie of the existing order be active to pose the power of the greatest power of the crafting questions through which the human right over the non-fugitive metamatic analysis political ontology can only reproduce the discourse of its foundation alienation acquisition grammar something with the universe essential ontological question as foundation accumulation fungibility of grammar something the explanatory part of the human discourse is breaking down the basis of the black effort pessimism these was meaning boxes variously unculturally interpolated identity and conscious political attribute sexual position occupation ability to fix all other positions that the role of the judge is to be an anti-ethical decision maker all decision calculus must revolve around the ontological entity of the state. This Korean 13 racism is ethical because it captures blacks in the ontological entity of the state the historical humanity that allows whites to flashlights and death racism necessary for the world to exist as chief republic conception of man has to be a cultural shift into interruption of perception of humanity with force of sociological consensus to racial cost of them the human and subsequent to this not the present conception of man is the axiomatic rupture of the white existence lineage humanity's only one obstacle the oppression of freedom over the problems of the suggestion of liberation are immoral but the part of immoral go to the case of the affirmative education no makes their performance complicit in this conscious racism that turns the case of as king and anyone is conscious of critical habit of mind that justifies inequity and exploitation by accepting the existing order things and giving critical consciousness about the ethical judgment about the social order consciousness is set to uncritically this conscious racism perform racism that justly accepts a lot of white norms and which is the essence of consciousness but in the inherent consciousness uncritical ways to think about rich and equity accepted and culturally sanctioned assumption myth and believes to justify social and economic advantage of white people have the result of smart and diverse other reaction to information about societal inequity conceptualizes this turn this conscious racism as one form of racism that takes its closer rights war era of intellectual conservatism and turn this conscious racism affects our social agency meaning that the performance ignores radical change and the rhetoric of human rights and reality is the rhetoric of the savory Western civilization feel the need to save those who they consider to be savages as neutral and took a human rights and human rights institution U.S. and human rights by the time between human rights is right out of the human rights liberalism as international savage and non-Western culture that is the alienated suffering of victims European Western of the savior and capitalism who self-relation lies away in the imposition of human rights.
Yep. Okay. what about the affirmative lends coherence to a structure of racism?
Two things. First is your conception of the family. We think this debate should be about metaphysics. Your conception of the family ignores a history of natal alienation whereby different bodies that are dispossessed don't have articulations or access to a conception of family.
Why? Okay, hold on. Why is the affirmative tied down to that conception of family?
Your conception of family is rooted in ideas of control and possession. We think that for bodies that cannot possess themselves, there's no articulation
why is it rooted
of what
in
is
control
family.
and possession?
You said what?
The point is for them to have the freedom of access to contraceptives.
Correct, which the slave does not have. There's no freedom over the body to have the contraceptive forms. Like you can give contraceptives to China.
There's a difference between a black person's ability to engage in civil society and their access to contraceptives.
Correct. We're saying this is about metaphysics.
Right.
Okay, and what does that mean in the context of the act, I guess?
That your conception of metaphysical categories necessarily lets
Okay,
other
what is
identities
your
construct
conception of
themselves in
metaphysical
opposition
categories?
to blackness. Your conception of the family. Like this is the same shit over and over.
Okay, what is the second thing?
What do you mean? What's the second?
The first thing was conception of family. What is the second thing?
What are we trying?
You said there were two links to the K. The first one was our conception of the family.
Well, there's multiple. The second one goes on to the mutual piece of evidence that I read on the case debate, which says that any attempt for the U.S. to go out and save other people or provide protection for other people is the Eurocentric Western ideal of the savior mentality.
Okay, so should these people not have access to contraceptives?
That's not the question of this debate. Once again, like Nisha said in the
it is because the affirmative poses that question. Should these people have access?
Once these three judges vote affirmative, nothing happens. This debate is about a question of education and how we forefront methods and rhetorical discussions in the debate space.
But the affirmative poses the question: and should people have access to
you pose
contraceptives?
a question. We pose a metaphysical question that
Right.
problematizes your education.
Right.
Okay, and this goes back to the first family.
Right, and then this also goes to the UN human rights arguments.
What is disconscious racism?
An uncritical habit of mind that doesn't challenge the way in which current structures in society operate, i.e. reading a plain text and not knowing the detrimental effects it may have on ignoring the metaphysical structure and ontological structure of blackness.
What is a human right?
What is a human right?
Yeah.
We think there are no human rights.
Well, you clearly made a claim that the UN and the United States has been slammed on human rights.
That's contingent upon your understanding of human rights.
Right.
And what is our understanding of human rights?
So
we never made a
people
claim
rights
about
that
human
people
rights, first of
deserve.
all, but what
A
do you think is our
natural conception
rights?
of rights that people deserve.
Right.
Our argument is that within civil society there are positions of abject that though they deserve these conceptions are lacking those conceptions.
Right.
Okay, so then should these people? I guess that gets back
What
to
do
the
you mean
original
these
question.
people?
Should these people not have access to that?
Right,
policy
Jerry,
in the
once
first
again,
place?
this debate is a question of education. These judges' ballots are not bills that go into Congress.
But
We
part
are
of that
formulating how we become
question
citizens.
is evaluating the ethicalities of giving access to.
Yes, and we are evaluating the ethicality of the discourse of the 1AC, which we think should be rejected.
But those aren't.
Yeah. So 9.
We're not right. We are merely referees. Huh?
Did I miss something?
No, we're just joking.
Jokes on joke.
So thank yous first, the TAB staff for running a really good tournament, well organized, our administrators, our principal, Ms. Kress, and Superintendent Austin for supporting and allowing debate, my parents who really have done a lot to support me, including helping out with the team's finances, driving to and from airports a lot, staying up with me to make sure I do my homework and go to school the next day. My mom especially has been really critical to our team specifically, being even able to travel. So I'm really indebted to her for not only who I am as a person, but or as a debater, but also as a person. To our coaching staff, Scott, who just he'll move a mountain for us if that meant any better chance of success. He works harder than anyone I know, really brilliant, and I'm going to miss him a lot. Hemanth, who a lot of his coaching advice is just memes, but it's really good. He's just the smartest person I think I've ever met, and a lot of fun to pick his brain. Fred, Akash, Ryan, Arjun, Akil, Anav have just been cutting cards for us this whole weekend, and it's been a huge help. To McDonogh, you all are just debated you a lot, really enjoy it. Every single one of these debates is amazing. To Jerry, oh my God, man. We've been partners all 4 years. We've had 500 some odd debates together, so I couldn't think of anyone else that I want to do it with. So thank you. And to the community writ large, there's very few other things that I'd rather be doing. I wouldn't trade one debate for like a year of life. So that's maybe not, but like I really enjoy this, and I'm glad you all do and put in the effort to make this activity what it is. So with that, the case and then the case.
Like your advantage or like what they read?
Oh, the solvency and then.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Kill more trees. Yeah.
Nothing.
The affirmative saves hundreds of thousands of people from dying due to a lack of reproductive health services and challenges conservative doctrines that otherwise govern American policies, which are all good things. The negative has not contested anything. This conscious racism argument will be mostly answered on the critique because the permutation includes that other focuses, but we did not ignore the other effects. Our 1EC evidence specifically accounts the way that different people are affected and need different family planning services, which allows that intersectional approach that the evidence calls for. The human rights link. Our evidence is not about human rights. It is about the right for people to have family planning, which is distinct. Their evidence is also about pressure on others, i.e. that their governments are savage, but our affirmative is a positive guarantee, i.e. that the United States must give something to other people, which means that the U.S. has a failure and is not a human right, even if human rights rhetoric is good. Element 16 courses and other expensive demand to offer approaches in Hong Kong to advocate for the Chinese government to turn confusion, racial scenarios are not possible even because confusion so demand for reality to provide democracy and when these more provision of these schools are so-called Western deals of some academics that capital democracy, human rights, and rule of law, but these should be understood not as Western, but as modern, only protected against the risk of stable abuse or trials, making the government accountable citizens protect themselves only by fighting for these ideals. Efforts that provide democracy should be understood not as alternatives to model issues, but the variants are just the difference between the democratic system that would to be democratic in China, but and each other form the U.S. When citizens in Western countries clamor for democracy, there's no reason to suspect elitism or Western manipulation. Not everything is imperialism. Overcome the discourse of us. Then will open up more propaganda news for responding to examination, critique, framework. The came as proof that the plan is a bad idea, and weighing the act is vital to fair and predictable engagement. Fairness is an impact. Intrinsic competitive constraints like speech time prove it has merit and should be preserved. Whether the plan actually happens is irrelevant. It's merely an educational tool that postulates what if, which is valuable to compare in debate. It's important to have debates about the intricacies of reproductive health. Schools have failed us, and discourse is dominated by bias, ideological warfare. Objective analysis is incredibly important to help vulnerable populations tackle a culture of stigma, especially for the underprivileged and the youth. That's the weekend. Scenario analysis is also valuable. It develops creativity and reflexivity that develops tools to navigate multiple scenarios for oppression. That's the pharma evidence. Contingency is false and belief in social death worsens the problem. Gordon 17 to the announcement made the white and black cultures be more close to the ACO, human Israeli, and the thing claim is Swati.
the project practically making people actually becoming themselves is another. The fight against racism is a fight against being down others. Racism, the institution, social norm to be empowered individuals centrally without this. Racism simply be obnoxious without this. Racist points of view affect the world without that. Racism becomes relevant. Objection to an Afro-Pats make assertion for social activity has to be raised. Why must the social movement supremacy, the attitudes, perspective, anti-black racism, why don't blacks among each other and other communities are called accounted? If the racism function of power, why not study power instead of asserting the manifest ontological? This requires looking beyond blackness to understand blackness. The identity requires more than an intersecting model. Otherwise, there will be simply normative outcome. Whoever manifests in maximum determined intersecting terms, optimism, pessimism, and art. The same attitude of a priori assertions on beyond human existence is contingent but not an accident. The world is a manifestation of human actions because human beings can only build the fusion studies determining us. The task of defensive the pessimistic is an act of forecasting what there was no way to know what some actions are tautological reflection of our commitments. What is not about success for whether we deem them worth doing. Permutation do both. If the U.S. has been slammed by the Human Rights Council, the act is consistent with their condemnation of the illiberalism of the United States and the failures of democracy. We don't deny the way slaves had their families torn apart. Our conception of family is not immutable and is accessible to black folks, and many black folks do need family planning. So the act is still a good idea. Macro political change is good and can be combined with struggles against anti-black violence. Robert's 15, the sociogenic Madrid statistically knows macro political life. There will be agency non-fleeing acts reordering of the status constitution by cognition, metaphysics, egalitarianism. Hope conditions not places vital Madrid against presumption slaves exist in state social death. The idea that social death is not insignificant, the psychology of freedom rendering it unable to explain how states are able to become free physically outside of the action intensive enslaving agents cannot explain the metaphysics of freedom, therefore offering an incomplete account of becoming free as it relates to the Constitution itself and the drastic alterations of social structures. The loathsome life in this South zone might be it is a flight always exists, but there shall look fixed this phenomenon unable to avoid the effects of another's own language. At this point, it's to exhibit an edict that transcends periodization, however, can counter to Nazi zone. Kennedy's actions in the zone of non-being harbored the prospects of a revolution among who the unfree who ascertain dissatisfaction within existing life options. The world can get better. They're statistically wrong. Jake's been 922 African American communities are suffering by ailments that Eric Foner, Colombian historian, who's written numerous books on slavery. However, it's absurd to say that in the worst shape putting slavery aside, go back to the Great Depression. In fact, I would encourage this client historian Stanford to read it's much better than the previous decade. There's solid statistical evidence of black experience has been on an upward trajectory. Unemployment is exactly what present day. It's Rogers talking 2016. Unemployment rate was 8%. It's only been this low for black Americans since 1972. Poverty never fell below 30% since 1994, but it's only been below than it is now for in 40 years. Life expectancy 1900 black men would expect to live until their mid-30s. Since then, life expectancy has doubled. Black men have life expectancy from birth in the low 70s, where women sit in the high 70s. The educational team to graduation rates of high schools, colleges have risen over time. Over the past half century, African Americans, suspect trailing blacks, have been significant starting expectancy attainment and other measures, and currently have unemployment and poverty rates that are near historical lows. Trying to invent a new grammar to explain structural antagonisms doesn't address violence on its own term, resulting in the incapacity to improve the world. Lots of community. How might we interact with the Afro-Pessimism? The answer is thinking the reckless as a condition of possibilities of social justice. My efforts can be dismissed by the Afro-Pessimism reiteration of Parks instead. Pursue once epistemological translated and logically comprehensible concepts. The words and culture a new language, but Afro-Pessimism is not too reliant on abstract theories of political overbrought by owing social weightlessness, brought about by abstraction, creative, figurative, social stuff, and they're not intrinsic, but as a living experience, it must be articulated. Antagonist is not static when a black person, when a non-black person is thus toward the conditions approximating black structural position that event, a different critical call of black and Afro-pessimism when claiming that Brown was the dead satisfaction thing with the undead existence material socially supplies the reason for defending the language wherever blacks everything perhaps there's no way to ever go through the black directly through the zombies to identification of the gaming, the fundamental antagonist shows with black racialized politics party, a new vocabulary for scholars to come to grips with material politics black and even their structures of different skills, academic dynamics are not associated with identity, Wilson's criticism is launched from resides within the same just dynamics. Our shared suffering should be vastly different than the magnitude should be asserted in the model of transnational fidelity. They've shut off debate over productive debate over solutions, so the alt fails shall be somebody opinion possible for the black community to determine whether the impoverished condition is due to institutional race and world trade and conservative ideology. Some of the explanations there are empirical difficulties to determine the causal significance of factors. They charge the world to determine the practical remedy according to each fact. The social world is complicated. That's the empirical inquiry required development system. Charges they must rely on open public debate, guarding a rationally motivated consensus attention to the distinction between exposed superficiality theory that seeks to reduce all the social obstacles of black states to white supremacy. A more empirically grounded analysis is needed to comprehend inequality. Permutation do the alternative. Universal ontologies to prevent particular analysis and justify violence, and then is wrong in the name of philosophical purity. Exceptions to rules should and can and should be recognized to prevent atrocity, i.e. denying hundreds of thousands of people contraceptives that can save their lives. That's the Zanotti evidence. This also disproves the role of the judge argument. We shouldn't ontologize the analysis of violence. It makes normative and case-by-case evaluation possible. Barnett and ontologization of violence stretches the concept of violence to include psychological, structural, and epistemic aesthetic violence. The perspective is not addressing the question of whether it is possible that it's just by violence from the violence to become conceptual expansion of violence to keep open the possibility of asking whether modalities action are capable of subjective normative steering. This allows us to connect the variety of forms of violence without losing sight of crucial features that enables us to retain perspective in which the question of justification can be responsibly addressed. These respect the violence across all attributes group undermines the efforts to explain violence. Engagement with institutions is good, even if imperfect. Their fatalism is the right wing's plans working. Read 8. Current debates has an unfortunate either or quality. You both racially discriminatory
and a boon to many Black Americans. Black Americans relatively less, but relatively not many Blacks emerged through the Democratic Electoral Coalition was one of the factors contributing to the civil rights insurgency. Political institutions and politics rooted in these have taken far-reaching consequences. The politics are right understands well. Gingrich president had to do taking the federal government back in the 1920s. He wanted to extricate from the culture the idea the government could be acting force for making people slugs better by currently public institutions. They leave us without any rudder for focus on effective political experience. Younger Americans today, the government capacity has been only dismiss and disparage government actions can change the playing field in progressive ways. What we need most of all is a articulated politics steeped in vision. Floating picks are bad. They prevent nuanced strategies over ideas to tackle oppression and steal the entire affirmative, which undermines clash critical to any nuanced debate. Dealing with injustices that only affect us as ethnically bankrupt community. I do wish we might see a change perspective that deal with a change reflected about the need for personal relevance, policymakers, skeptical about disaster relief until the second viewpoint now. Sports marriage politics because it's not a day. The next step is, and then we'll see the world of having experience justice personally. The next step is, this is necessary for justice until that expanded amnesty, self-preserving, self-centered for justice. They can only grow personal interest quality. It lacks the ability to be indignant, especially when one is personally among the injured. We can follow the politics of narcissism or politics of narcissism.
Before we start cross-ex, my computer just crashed, so can I have
Undefeated.
I think.
Right?
What do you mean announce?
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I don't really do it. I might. There's just like.
I know.
You in the debate there? You debating with
I don't remember that now. I haven't played since
Who else is counting? I just, yeah, Tom.
Then I had that one lag. Well, maybe that's just before. I can't remember. I had that one lag. And it had like 2 emergency plates stuck in the dude's head.
Yeah.
Did you get a flash? Down to mouth open.
I'm not.
One year. So one lag and he was playing, and for some reason she pronounced it. And she was like, she like plans her like jaw down on the dude's face, so like her jaw is like half of his face is like all cut up and he's spit. I joined this.
Travis
We all I feel like it was that one question where we all do that smartly.
Are you all ready over there?
You start your choice off with AF saves hundreds of thousands of people. After this debate, we'll all go home, etc. So why shouldn't we focus more on the ethics and discourse of the Wenatee to prepare us for the real world rather than these hypothetical endings?
Well, nothing that voting negative doesn't really change anything either.
Right, it's about education.
Right. It is an ethical endorsement of the plan. However, debate still has intrinsic competitive merits that make it to some degree a game.
Right.
So
Obviously, it's competitive. There are like norms in the game. There are speech times, speech orders. I'm talking about the educational question that debate poses. If the impacts of the AF never happen, why should we just focus on that educational and
because
ethical values?
It is valuable to compare what the world would look like if we did an idea.
Right.
That's what your alt does too. If we adopted this unflinching paradigmatic analysis, what would the world look like? And that is exactly what we do with our plan. So
that's fine. If the U.S. has been slammed recently by human rights violations in all these countries, including China, are like, y'all need to fix your anti-blackness first before helping other countries, why is this an AF argument?
Because our AF is not about the U.S. reforming other countries' human rights.
But you're saying that you're going to provide family
It is to some degree reforming its own human rights because we have defunded a global agency that we funded for decades that provides family planning services to the globe.
So is that a global agency or focused on U.S. anti-black racism?
It is, well, the distinction is sort of not true. Our evidence suggests that there are millions of black folk globally that need family planning services.
Right. We're talking about domestic anti-blackness. What does the app do in terms of that?
It provides reproductive health services that are incredibly important to some of the most vulnerable communities.
Why should the U.S. go and help other people on human rights violations when
because there is no trade-off. There's no trade-off between saying that we should go help people who are dying in childbirth and saying that anti-blackness in the United States is bad.
That's not the argument, but that's fine. How can you say that our conception of family is accessible to black folk when you don't define what a family is?
We did. I defined it as any consensual relationship between two willing people.
Any consensual
that they both
relationship.
believe it is a family.
That's
like,
fine. And how do black folk access that?
Black folk can have
Within their
consensual relationships between willing partners.
Within their ontological position.
Yes.
That's fine. What does the world getting better have to do with the fact that there's still a gap of value between black and white lives?
Well, our evidence says that gap will define the gap of value.
Like certain lives are valued more than others. So while blacks progress, whites progress even more, and there's still a gap between those
that
lives.
explicit argument is answered in our Jacobson evidence. Says that whites are not progressing at a faster rate than blacks, and the gap is actually closing.
Right. I'm saying, why is it progress if they're still both progressing and there's still a gap between those bodies? Why is that progress?
Because progress is not tomorrow the world is perfect. It is better. And it is better.
So you're saying if whites are saying like 100 meters ahead, and then in 100 years later they're only 80 meters ahead, that's progress, even though they're still ahead?
That is incredibly slow progress, but our Jacobson evidence would indict that rate at which you believe progress is occurring. Also, the meters analogy is kind of odd. Our evidence says there have been massive strides made in all these.
We live with 937.
Yeah.
Cover it.
Coffee's making me more tired. I know. It's just...
October 27th.
Yes. Oh yeah, like the mini golf. Oh yeah, we played mini golf. It's hilarious.
Let me send out cards for
Oh yeah, check this out. Old one. So there's an Old Testament course, New Testament course, and the miracles.
I saw thinking about after I transferred down.
Oh yeah, I know nothing about Christianity. That's what that is. But we went to the Jesus minute golf. So the first, the Old Testament course, the second part was really cool. Then we had the Garden of Eden. Ah yes, when we committed our house.
Yes.
So Noah's Ark. So
Do y'all have any water?
Yes. So, well, not just Noah and him. So it's like Noah and his wife and the kid and 2 other kids.
oh, okay, so the kids can get it too. Oh, that makes sense. Right.
So we're all probably.
Ah,
We started with
right.
and then just continued it because there's too many songs. If I remember my life.
That's true.
That's about right.
Fun fact. I didn't realize I used to talk for you. I looked back on it and I was like, wow. Or not necessarily crazy.
Are you good? You ready?
Yeah.
All right. He's ready. Let's quiet down.
Awesome. So I actually have a document open in front of me, which I wrote in sophomore year that says, God willing, I get to finals. I hope I get to give this speech. I'm happy that that is coming true. I'm happy to be in this position. Extremely grateful to be here. Now, Jerry started off his story somewhat similar to mine beginning in 6th grade. Though he joined debate on his own volition, that was not necessarily the case for me. I got in trouble around the house, and so my mother forced me to join debate as a form of punishment. But for that, I cannot be any more thankful for both of their support, contribution, and pushing me towards doing this activity. Even though for the first 2 years, every day I would come back home, have the same debate with my mother. Do I really have to go back to practice again? Now the tables have turned, and I'm grateful for all of their support, both for my mother and father, for all the numerous sacrifices that they have to make, whether that be scheduling things around debate or putting up with me doing speed drills at 6 in the morning, all of the different things that they have to do to accommodate me, I'm incredibly thankful for, as well with my sister having to put up with speed drills. I know she doesn't really like that much. And also a big shout out goes to DB. Like Ryan touched upon earlier, we would be nothing without DB. We would still be those 2 little kids walking around running the security key we downloaded off the NDCA website. And to this day, my most liked Facebook post has been the one where I said, DB is the man, and that definitely speaks to the nature of his contribution to the McDonogh debate program and all that he does, both in terms of making us better debaters, but also helping us grow as people. I also want to thank Ryan for being a fantastic 2A, reminding me not to drop permutations and extend counter interpretations, and really covering my back in everything, every speech that I give. I wish you the best of luck next year at Emory, except for when we debate each other. Special shout out also goes to Callum. A lot of what I say in my speeches is literally me just reading what Callum says, because no one says it better than Callum. Also thanks goes out to Sahil. Being in that partnership with Sahil was critical. He transformed me from that little kid who didn't know how to flow, didn't know how to read cards, into a slightly better form of myself. Thanks also goes out to Alyssa, Ryan, Raj, George, Michael, Gabe, Victoria, Sion, Shinidi, Lopez, Jake, Joe, John, Simon, Kevin, Isabel, Hirsch, and I'm sorry if I forget others, for Capital Debate. And I think that's where we did the most growing as debaters, and I think that's also what fostered that change between myself coming home each day and saying, Ma, I really don't want to show up again, and actually wanting to show up again because of that sense of community. I also owe thanks to Sarah for all of the positive encouragement, Christine for teaching me so much over the years, Emily for putting up with me in all our arguments, Dave, I'm wearing your mala right now. His constant support and encouragement is always appreciated. Krishna for all the snacks, the Facebook posts, the cards, pretty much everything that keeps McDonogh JN going. To Nutria, that was a fantastic debate in the previous round. Definitely one of my favorite debates of high school. To Eve for always being there every time I have to complain about something. And to BCC because Maryland versus everybody. But most importantly towards the debate community, because this is the community in which I've done the most growing. I think I really realized that during the college application season when I realized that every question that asked something to do with my identity, everything was always related back to debate or articulated in terms of debate or even enhanced by my participation in debate. And I really do think that absent debate, I'd still probably be that kid walking around in his Dunkin' Donuts costume in sophomore year Halloween. Also to Miss Livermore and Mr. Britton for supporting the McDonogh debate team and everything that they do to keep everything live. And to all of our lab leaders over the past few years, I think we did a lot of growing from all of you. That's Weston, Liam Hancock, Rob Mulholland, Matt Malia, Amber Kelsey, Lindsay Shook, Tyler Anderson, Gio, Marquise Ard, William Morgan, Joe Krakoff, Brooke Kimbrough, Jordan Foley, Brian Rubai. And also to the Berkeley debate team, I can't wait to debate for y'all next year. And then finally to Peninsula, I'm happy that our final debate of high school gets to be against a team where we actually like y'all. Okay, it'll be substantial overview, probably warrants a new sheet, then case breakdown. I'll sign first. Alright, anyone not ready? At the top, the one he sees emblematic of desire to preserve society's apparatus of conditioned black ontology to a state of death and non-existence, even 1% risk of the app being anti-black warrants, and bound we have described a civil society that should guide your decision. Anti-blackness is the defining system by which the world operates to the cohering of civil society around the dial like the black body. Injustice has perpetuated the impact. It's anti-black violence has caused an objective vertigo of life constituted by disorientation because the world is shaped by violence upon you. Nothing makes sense when you kill for no reason. The deaths of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and just a few examples of this larger overall system in Northeast acclaim turns the app because it means that 1, the app doesn't actually do anything because it doesn't restructure ontology, and 2, it only risks reproducing anti-blackness as the first one. And see, Wilderson garbage I'll explain here. I'll go ahead and do the big link here. Every bit of link work I do functions as a descent to the app of permutation, which means we don't need to win an alternative or thesis claim if we win a risk of a link. Think of this as a functional anti-blackness dissent there, focused on human rights and other nations prior to a confrontation of human rights. Here it recapitulates blackness into that position of abject and non-human. It allows us to conceptualize a framework of ethics by which we treat others without how we treat black folk, even if you think the one I see is hypothetically a good idea. This debate is about metaphysics. Debate is an educational space, so considering the metaphysical implications comes prior to scenario planning because Peninsula gets every other debate on this topic to do that. This is the finals of the TOC, a chance to make history by letting the first black person ever win the TOC, which would be a literal performance of the alternative. This debate should be about community setting. We have a unique opportunity to force a discussion of metaphysics. This means that their drive to fix human issues elsewhere further defines a category of human that can articulate itself in opposition to blackness. They can give contraception to China but do nothing to resolve the contraception that is lead bullets lodged in the bodies of countless marked bodies, which is why the alternative is the best metaphysical reorientation by which we can reject a perfection of the category of the human in favor of a new anti-ethical system, which is your role as the judge, meaning if we win their metaphysical ethics are bad, then you vote negative. They're going to stake this debate as the AFA being a good idea, but you need to recognize that this debate does not do anything except for risk that our metaphysical orientations can shape the community. Second is that their conceptions of the family are anti-black. The first articulation of this is the Wilderson card we read about natal alienation, which is the idea that slaves are stripped of their humanity and conception of a family. You could always be stripped from your family at any moment, thus collapsing down on the conception of a family and being able to relate to others because you don't even have conception of your own body or possession of yourself, which means that they further be able to define the category of the human and the family by being able to allow people in China to be able to further describe how their families operate, which lets them create is a fluid conception of family which they can define in opposition to blackness. Second of all is that family control assumes the possession of over the body, which the human Chinese subject does have, but the slave doesn't have. This metaphysical reorientation allows them to recreate a category that further creates itself in
opposition to blackness, thus allowing us to re-ontologize violence, which means even if they win all their claims about how anti-blackness is ontological, now the process of the affirmative re-ontologizes that violence. Third is it lets others create their identity in opposition to blackness. The theory of semiotics says that the way that words work is that mutually interpretable, but that signs also define themselves in opposition to other signs, i.e. a dog is a dog because it is not a cat. Thanks, Peyton, which is the idea that the Chinese family's driving credence of the family allows civil society to further alienate the black subject for the human because they're able to recreate themselves in opposition to that, and the alternative is an unflinching paradigmatic analysis which is posing question of civil society's unethicality within. This means a rejection of the act for being anti-black and their affection and its justification and construction in the act has come to grips with the nature of civil society. Even if you don't buy alternative solves, you think that the act acts and impacts on your winner comes about the worldview of negative because any attempt to best level in discourse exacerbate civil society. This is a presumption argument goal to line by line they make a bunch of framework arguments leave space on the rule is going to be the one and they say contingency fault. That's a Gordon 17 argument. First of all, you can refer to all my arguments I made on the overview about semiotics theory, the press them for specifics and answering that, otherwise they can't win. That is contingent. Second of all, Gordon post negative. That's Gordon Jackson in 13 songs where he expressed ambivalence calls to become post human like Lewis Gordon. Black people must be humans for the obvious reason. Dominic Ruku can give up humanism for the simple fact that human is presumed not to such ethics. Gordon simply sought a mission in normative category of the human rather than aim was to display the order of the man altogether. They say permutation with do both. You can group both the permutations here. First, that the permutations either link or they sever. The alternative was rejection of the act of being anti-black severing. The one you see from his discourse, we also have a link to their educational model means any logical form of permutation would have to sever out of their education claim. Severance of the voter makes the one you see moving target voter via advocacy skills never learn to defend anything unconditionally. That's the most portable debate. In fact, that's voter for fairness in education. Second is that if the permutation solves, you can kick the alternative for us vote negative on occasion. We don't need to win an alternative, just need to win a risk of a link that proves that the act is bad and let it reify certain metaphysical categories which warrants a rejection of the permutation is the worst metaphysical strategy. Any implementation of the alternative or discourse entails rejecting your focus, saying we need to critically examine the black family rather than engaging in their politics. Perm to the all means they lose because the alternative rejects the entirety of the one you see because it's faulty metaphysical orientations. The permutation can't solve because the one you see can navigate example of traditional models and make it within modern while critiquing those metaphysical categories because it reverses any progress that the next trying to make the true mutually exclusive. I was proven by the link arguments that we made days. They make this argument that the U.S. gets slammed by the world, but that proves that the affirmative is reactionary, that they only do things like offer family planning in reaction to people to preserve the legitimacy within civil society. They say black people need family planning. They lose the debate for this because, first of all, this is the idea of social control by being able to make black populations reduce the amount of output is able to control civil society by being able to reduce the amount of people being injected. Second of all, this endorses black death. It's a project, it's a task that works towards the end of blackness within civil society by being able to endorse these forms of contraceptives, i.e. the lead bullets lodged within the bodies of people, the force that this problematizes these forms of metaphysics because the idea of black people needing family planning assumes that there's access to the family. That was all the arguments on the overview. They say macro-political change is good, but this is irrelevant because this debate is about education. Metaphysics comes before action because it's a question of our orientations. That's what debate is about. They say the world can get better. That's the Jacobs evidence. First of all it says is that we're not in slavery anymore, which means that things are intuitively better, but that's not the reason why things are good now. Just because rates for different forms of oppression are lower doesn't mean ontological violence doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that people like Trayvon don't get shot or different people don't have dispossession ideas in terms of the humanity. Also, time doesn't progress, it accumulates, meaning that even if things are getting better, that doesn't deny the fact that there is an ontological void that creates different forms of violence. They say trying to invent a new grammar fails. First of all, the point is that there is no grammar. It's the idea that grammar is what gives words coherence to be able to make meanings out of these. The idea is that blackness has no meaning, or the idea of stripping blackness of those different metaphysical categories has no meaning behind it, which is entirely the point. Make them also explain this. I doubt they know what that means. They say we should have solutions in debate. That's shall be 7 evidence. First of all, we think that it's about metaphysics before solutions because we think that those solutions necessarily will reproduce these conditions of metaphysics. I.e., when you, if you were affirmative for a Peninsula and endorse their plaintiffs, you recreate a conception of the family that lets itself define itself in opposition to blackness, which is why we need to have metaphysical discussion prior to actually passing these plans. Second of all, is that nothing actually happens within debate, which is why it's a question of these metaphysical orientations. They say we shouldn't ontologize violence as the Barnett 9 card. We agree, but the Squirrel doesn't agree because the Squirrel is what ontologizes the violence. That's the overview. And that's why I did all above semiotics. Make them answer that with specificity. They need to beat back against our abject thesis that civil society needs blackness to be able to consider itself, to be able to have itself give credence. They say engaging institutions is good, but it's the same argument as shall be. We think that engaging institutions necessarily problematizes the idea that there's metaphysical categories that pre-structure how you engage those institutions. For example, certain people can't engage in those institutions in the same way, which is the reason why we need to be able to focus on these forms of violence. They say dealing with yourself is ethically bankrupt, but this is just another way of saying black people stop talking about black people is another way to problematize how can you possibly read an app about family planning and not accept some expect someone to read an argument about the conception of the family. This idea of ethical bankruptcy also goes against our anti-ethics thesis, which the idea that they've derived a form of ethics that's premised off of faulty metaphysical categories. I'm going to read another card here that proves social death theory. Ontology is unattainable in colonized civilized society. Ontology does not permit understanding of being black and black people. No ontological resistance within the white case. The custom and source upon which they were based were wiped out, and the defining such yourself a real dialogue between body and world as phenomenon. If you do every ontology being unattainable, colonized civilized society, ontology does not permit us to understand the being of black man, for not only must the black man be black, must be black in relation to the white man. The black man has no ontological resistance in the eyes of the white man. In the white world, man of color encounters difficulties in the development of his bodily scheme of consciousness of the body, soul, and negating activity, which means that if we're able to win that this category of blackness is an ontological void that's structured by different forms of abjection and being able to define itself in relation to others, then we're able to win that doing the 1AC without having that critical contestation or rejection of their plan is a bad idea, because it reproduces these metaphysical categories, which you have a unique opportunity in the finals of the TOC to stop.
We're gonna take some breath.
Yep.
Why is our definition of a family in opposition to blackness?
No, it's that when you create the idea of a family, so we're presuming that blackness has no access to this category of the family. When you create or are able to define or let people define their families, that lets them create those families in opposition to what blackness cannot possess. This is
why can blackness not possess the family? I get that in slavery, families were broken up. Why does that mean black people?
Not just in slavery. Every time that a policeman shoots a black male and dispossesses a child from their father.
I agree. Families are broken up now. That does not mean
it's not just that families are broken up. It's that you don't have access to a family because you never know when your family gets taken away from you.
Okay, well, that doesn't mean that our definition of family is entirely
in a metaphysical sense. This debate is about metaphysics.
Okay, define why is family an ontological condition?
It's a metaphysical condition.
Okay.
The idea of the family is something that can be presupposed.
What evidence do you have that proves things are defined in their opposition to other things rather than just in themselves?
First of all, we have Wilderson evidence talking about how blackness is the object of civil society. This relies on the logic that different things need to create.
There were societies that developed a definition of the family prior to the slave trade. So how can you explain that definition of family?
Because as soon as the slave trade happens, that problematizes the metaphysical category of the human.
But those definitions clearly existed, so it seems to...
I understand they existed until slavery happened.
Okay, and then your argument is slavery is so over-determining that nothing can exist without defining itself in relation to blackness.
In a metaphysical sense, absolutely.
If you win that social death is real, that blackness is an ontological condition, why does that mean that materially improving the quality
You've already missed the boat.
I haven't asked
metaphysics. We think metaphysics presupposes discussion of material.
I get that. Though we may not restructure an ontology. Though we may not restructure an ontology, why does that mean that the app is a bad idea?
Okay, exactly what I just said here. If you don't contend with those examples of metaphysics and you don't contend with those issues of ontology that problematize your metaphysical conceptions, then the actions you take further allow different metaphysical and ontological categories to define themselves in a way that further dispossesses black people.
Okay, that's the internal link I'm missing. Why further rather than just don't change?
Because every time you let and give credence to another system to be able to define itself, it further defines itself away
from
blackness.
Family planning is population controlling. Is your argument that reproductive health services like Planned Parenthood are bad?
Are you talking about the one where you were like, black people should have contraceptives?
Well, your answer was, you made an argument.
No, are we talking about Chinese people or black people?
There are black Chinese people, but that's besides the point. You made an argument in the 2NC
black
that
Chinese people
the UNFPA and family planning are attempts to control populations. Is that your argument, that reproductive health services, abortion, etc. are like population
Civil society uses contraceptives as a form of population control, whether that's condoms or bullets.
Alright. It's going to be the K on the framework, where it's like leave a little space, and then case. Now you're going to send out one card.
I'm sorry, what?
So K, framework, and then case.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I should do that. Well, there's bold aspirations that line that. Yeah, I get a lot of that. Yeah, halfway through my first college career judging, I was like, nope. I give up on my debating. Oh, when I debated, I just and see, this is why I was judging. I was going to try because that's what all the papers I just said.
That would require your efforts.
Man, debaters lie. They say that they're all the same order. I know. I like to know.
All right. Is anyone not ready? Consistently, performance at the top of the one and see was a bad idea and will cause Peninsula to debate this narrative devices and expose the limits of the current liberal democracies who actually provide liberation for the white body written by political activists. Jimmy Boggs, he was married to political philosopher and activist Grace Lee Boggs after 40 years until his death. Boggs was active in the Far Left Organization, Correspondence Publishing Committee, Bed Illinois. CMR James were around the time the leftist progress movement in the late early 1950s until Boggs and Grace Lee Boggs split in 1962 breaking with CMR James for Correspondence Publishing Committee earlier split in 1950 followed by Ryan, Risha, and nearly half of his membership, and James and Grace Lee Boggs remained loyal to the Correspondence Publishing Committee. The group advised CMR James on how to promote the atomic sound in Britain. 1955, James Boggs became an editor of the monthly publication of the Correspondence for political differences between CMR and James overcome the eventually led Boggs to take control over the Correspondence Publishing Committee in 1962 to continue a publication of only for a couple of years. James Boggs expressed the reasons for the 1962 split in his 1963 book, The American Revolution, Pages from a Negro Workers Notebook. He wrote a letter in which he described how the revolution would not happen through things like top-down institutional change, but rather grassroots activism that occurs within the status quo. Here's a quote that you can hang your hat on. No one in these old United States like to take responsibility for the country that they are in, but more rather ready to beat up and teach up people in other countries. This is exactly what the affirmative is. It's the mutual evidence that we read. This is the piece of evidence that we read on human rights from the one that instead of focusing on the human rights violations domestically, that cross-expose, they always want to go global and expand the expansion of U.S. democracy abroad. Also, here's another quote. No one in this country wants to take responsibility for the thousands of Negroes who have been beat up, shot up, jailed up in this country just for asking for some normal rights. Once again, it's not a priority to challenge anybody within the United States, but it's a priority to go to other countries and engage with China over things that are happening in their country, but not struggling for what's happening to change the system. Also, they says that this is a struggle to change a system. Each right that the Negroes will win, and we'll have to show you a system. Any significant moves from now on must be in defiance of the American system and the American authorities. If the affirmative doesn't change the system, i.e. change the vision of how to view democracy, then they cannot meet our framework interpretation. Also, this is offense against the permutation made in the 2AC. Also, it says conflict with the whole country. This is also offense against the permutation because we are trying to challenge the way in which American democracy functions in the first place, to challenge the ontological structure of how Biden functions. And on its record, it's a system in which any responsible historian will have to judge as it having operated by race exploitation. These are the truths which the Negro struggle is bringing to light, and these are the truths that I'm bringing to light for the three judges on the panel to actually reject the orientation of the 1AC because it is anti-white. This is the framing that you will go for. The framing debate comes down to how we as intellectuals can formulate education and challenge the global system of anti-white sacred to its violence. One, nothing we do in this debate around our change any bearing on the political world. Cross-ex made clear that if you vote AF, all it is a fictional story of as if something also happened, but literally there's nothing in the real world. It's about educational models. This means that they cannot win cases justification to vote affirmative. Two, even if they win, then they plan results or impacts. This debate is only about the educational and in-round methods of performance, i.e. the performance of the 1&T's method to analyze the call for another composition of the 1&T. Three, prefer our kind of interpretation should be a critical intellectual task with evaluating the best educational strategy. Our model of debate is just the affirmative, can uphold a descriptive model that doesn't offend anti-black institutions to prevent white box education and create an intellectually productive discussion and debate. Four, we meet our framework via the link debate when we expose the antithesis by nature of the affirmative. This is key framing because it's your job as a judge to analyze the sinister functioning of anti-bias within the 1&T. Five, even if they win their affirmative debate, you still vote negative because the case of procedural issue, meaning that a suggestion to actually want yourself away from the federal government. Nothing more intention is the power question because they have to justify their political endorsement of abusive action before they can advocate the passing of the plan. These are all the links read in the 2&T. Also, they conceded the current piece of evidence such that you should frame your decision based on anti-ethics. This is key because this is what niche will be going for the 2&R based on how you frame your decision. This is around anti-ethics. You started from the ontological position of Biden. So if the 1AC is not able to do this, you are actually rejecting them. This was a damning concession for them coming out of the 2AC. Also, we are a prerequisite to testing the desirability of the plan. If we are discussing policies with an anti-black modernity, then we can never understand whether or not the plan is truly desirable to everyone because it doesn't take into account the black body. Also, we are exactly what the framework interpretation says. We prove that the entirety of the plan and case is bad. Our education outweighs their fairness. Claims fairness is historically determined by the white majority opinion, and either way there are no constraints. The fairness of the negative brings it to debate via our framing their scenario, planning analysis, and environment piece evidence does not matter in the face of brain pending by violence presented by the affirmative. Even if they win this argument, the negative does not prevent the scenario analysis from happening in the first place. We're a net better form of analysis in education. Also, we do not prevent a debate about policy engagement. The negative actually gets to the heart of the policy engagement and how the U.S. actually wants to impose its human rights in those courses everywhere else. What's the case to make here? Extend arcane evidence, which calls for a question. Their discourse, the performative ethos of the affirmative must be rejected, even if their intentions are good and their uncritical substance about anti-black surrenders and ancient only to disconscious racism that leaves institutional structure and domination intact. Star this argument, even if you buy to the rhetoric that the essays hundreds of thousands of people will then not only is the negative ahead on the debate that the ballot literally does nothing to alter that, but also their heuristic approach to the plan is a language to the agencies of the USFG that becomes unchallenged within the context of society, meaning that their thinking is unpaired. This is a dissent to the affirmative, turning back their performance. The affirmative claimed that they would answer this kind of racism on the critique, but if not, it was not answered and conceded now. It functions as an independent reason to reject the affirmative. This will cost Peninsula the debate once again. Their concession encompasses the fact that this ethical rejection is prior to any ethics of the 1EC4 for us, so let the 1ER to recover from this argument. The role of the debate is to break free from this visuality invoked by the pedagogical practices of contemporary competition. The rhetoric of the affirmative use in speech like debate is a game. There should be fairness in the game. There are rules, things like speech time. What if the debate was valuable? The framing issues misses the bottom. What we students are really here for and what the subject positions operate from. They say that their evidence is about human rights. That's asinine. All the evidence is about a framework of ethics, which we challenge. Only a rejection of the affirmative can provide students with an alternative on examination connection between macrosocial and microsocial issues. This builds a recognition of our personal experiences, political, ethical, and indoctrination in order to truly provide a liberatory practice for the negative to reject the 1AC.
That elbow way.
You said what?
One. I'm sending it.
Maybe someone not use this.
How much prep do y'all have left? 134.
The order is the case, the K overview, and then the K.
Just take a stack of papers. Risha knows. You just know how to do it.
Ready? Disconscious racism is just a big dressed up argument that's basically you have to interrogate racism. We agree on the firm proof that the plan and that interrogation is not an opposition. The game, the debate is a game. That'll be later on framework, but it does have some side educational value. That'll also be on framework. All of our framework answers disprove this and disprove these arguments on case and impact terms. If we're not divorced from the merits of the debate, and the perm includes their educational model. They extend the human rights link, but it's backwards because we accept U.S. failure. That is the entire point of the affirmative, which is why increase in funding is necessary to correct those things. Human rights are universal. They have no answer to allowing evidence that says it's necessary to stop authoritarian violence. If there's no other conception that can resolve these forms of genocide, the person of permutation recognizes the problem of the United States, which is consistent with their criticism of liberalism. Now, the critique overview, risk of link is not enough. They need an alternative, otherwise it's not unique. Decide they need a strategy because pointing out problems is not enough in our framework arguments. Impact term, the alternative solvency. Ontology is not prior to our solvency. They have card 0 about the ontology behind Chinese contraceptives. This proves that we don't reproduce anti-blackness through the plan. There's no human rights link. First, we impact on it on the case, and other debates don't. So we impact on the case. Now, other debates don't talk about offense. It's about the modern debate that we later. Contraceptives are not the same as police brutality. This is a metaphor, but it's definitely a stretch because there's two distinct concepts. Now, the link arguments. No grammar of suffering link. Black violence worse is not a reason we shouldn't help women who need contraceptives. It's also not contingent on each other. Black violence or police brutality is not the same as mothers dying from childbirth, so they can't be defined in opposition to each other. Family, there's no family link. We don't define family in opposition to black violence. The F isn't some kind of totalizing metaphysical understanding of the family. The F simply took a stance that says access to contraceptives are good and ethical. There's no, it's not a stance that black families are not lost to violence. These universalisms are bad. There's not the evidence says that focus on totalizing ontologies glosses over particulars about ethical choices like the plan. Political decision making should prioritize ethics and have modesty in applying the broad ontological claims. Specificity is necessary to solve mass violence. Universalism resulting in the Iraqi intervention. That's the tsunami card. The alternative doesn't solve the affirmative. Remember, they conceded it's not a. They conceded it's floating pics are bad, but the framework arguments do disagree with alternative solvency. Now, framework proper. We get the affirmative. It's key to fairness. In-depth discussions about racism should not be closed off to just metaphysics, but also the plan, because the intersection between reproductive health and racism has valuable education. Is educationally valuable, but that requires the consideration of public health advocacy. We don't prevent our ability to contest their criticism is also the critical turning to their education offense. One-sided debates where we don't get our locus of our offense. The locus of our offense is bad. Scenario analysis is the external net benefits pedagogically useful. The plan poses the question: what would the world look like if the government passed this policy? The analysis of the benefits and consequences is valuable because it teaches us the nuances of public health and helps us determine what we should support or how to organize and when to organize. That's the Barber card. This is especially true in the context of the F discussion of public health and settles and challenges the dominant ideology that contraceptives are evil and abortion is murder. Prioritizing metaphysical questions over the F continues the status quo shallow understanding of reproductive health, which sanctions millions of people to suffering and death. That's the Buchanan and Sonati evidence. They say liberal democracy bad. We didn't drop any of these arguments because framework and the permutation are implicit answers. The perm also includes a focus on democracy. We also their argument that they can change democracy is a double turn with Lutterson's thesis, which is that democracy has no hope of changing. They say revolution doesn't happen from top down. We are the resolution because grassroots can take a stance on the state, which is exactly what we do. Reject attention policing, Green Wall 12. I don't know about round accusing progressives who have different political priorities are being driven by vice. There are sorts of benign reasons why one might have different political priorities. Just this kind of innuendo with these existing and prioritization similarities of issues of devoting oneself to causes of rational backwards one human biracial political seeking gravities or ignore these issues, not highlight them, and purpose reducing these similarities of so large given challenges precisely because they're primary victims right and human privilege. That's why these issues are not just a distraction for the cause of equality, but are an embodiment of it. The links are not prior to the plan. You should wait them together. That was above anti-ethics. This was free prior to Nadi card, and they say that the scenario analysis is invaluable because of anti-black violence, but the alternative engages in that kind of scenario analysis too because it poses the question, what would the world look like with the alternative? Now the Gordon evidence says that contingency of anti-blackness is real. You define the world by anti-blackness. Slavery, saying that slavery restructured society proves that institutional focus can also restructure society. They define racism. Racism derives its power from institutions, which proves that their causality is backward and institutional focus is necessary. Permutation do all the F, which means it's not separate. We can also combine educational masses. Semiotics, things aren't always different. Defined in relation to blackness, the existence of society pre-slavery proves slavery is in a totalizing recondition. The zoonotic evidence proves particular and unique relations are possible. For example, families can be contrasted with the LGBT populations. Their population controlling is conservatism that denies healthcare to millions. The family planning for black people argument is not nonsensical. Our argument is that black people, although they have specific needs, there are also a general structural problem like lack of access to contraceptives.
Mind if I share? I'd appreciate it. Leave some for the two of them. I will. I just need one sip. Alright, order will be overview, case rate down, case. Is anyone not ready?
You have the power to make history today. You have the power to let a black person win the TOC. You have the chance to say metaphysics is important. You have a chance to say black literature and debate matters, which is why you view this debate as a question of metaphysics. This debate is about how we can reconfigure metaphysics as a prior question to action. TOCs have been won countless times on actions, but rarely do they put actions off in favor of a discussion of metaphysics. We're winning a few thesis level arguments for that science create themselves in opposition to other sides, which gives us the argument that civil society is always going to construct itself in opposition to blackness, so that blackness is that adject to civil society which gives its coherence, which gives it credence. None of their arguments about ontology are able to deny the central thesis about the reason why civil society being able to lack that coherence of blackness what allows it to be able to carry out these forms of ontologized violence, which means none of their turns are able to contest with our thesis level claim. Third is that blackness has no way to articulate these ideas of family because the question of natal alienation means that there's no possession or sense of kinship with your own family because it can be taken away from you at every moment by allowing Chinese people to redefine their humanity in terms of possession of a family. They recreate their family identities in opposition to what blackness cannot possess, or at least we want to risk that civil society incorporates another conception of family structure to wield against blackness, which means that passing the 1AC idea of their educational strategy only further ontologizes violence and puts it on the back burner. I know I've said this a bunch, but it really does matter. They focus on contraception abroad, does nothing to resolve the contraception that is the bullet, meaning our prior confrontation of metaphysics is the best ethical model and prior question of what we do in other countries. And metaphysics come before policy proposals or scenario planning because you can force the debate to be about the structures that never managed to have a place in this community. Their scenario planning is based on a world where ontology is still wielding violence against blackness, whereas our discussion configures how we understand the concepts we talk about, which is the best form of education debate cultivates Peninsula. Gets that round after round where they discuss the USFG just this once a year. We need to expand their educational model to incorporate a discussion of metaphysics with better influence people on both of our affirmative Korea, and the alternative is rejection of their metaphysical categories and undoing the concept of the family, which structurally does away with the 1AC, which is something they have not yet contested. You should be an anti-ethical decision maker. This is how you phrase your RFD quote. I vote negative because if it's true that debates a question of education, then the negative is one that the asked defense of family structures is anti-black, and the subsequent education produced that from that defense was bad. So I have to default negative since they, when the fiat is losing my roles to be skeptical of the 1AC for being anti-black, the negative one risk of a link in this framework goes uncontested. You can go to line by line. They say ontology is not prior. Yes, it is, because ontology frames the way by which we're able to carry out different forms of actions, because those actions take place in a society in which different forms of ontology inform how those actions are able to carry out in relation to different people, which is why metaphysics is a prior question to different forms of action. They say contraceptive is not police brutality, but it quite literally is. It means you can't have family structures because you never know when it's taken away from you. You never know when your parent or family members are going to get killed or taken away from you because you live in a state of dispossession. They say anti-blackness is not a reason why we shouldn't help women, but nobody helps them. You don't get fiat in a metaphysics debate evaluating the ultimate ethics come before the app. They say universalizations are bad. It's not universal as much as its foundational argument is that the signifier of blackness and that object to civil society is foundational to the creation of civil society. Civil society is not universal, much rather that it preconfigures their ideas of it. Go to the framework debate. Our framework revolves on the conceited performance of the affirmative can't escape and warrants rejection. The debate is the issue of the result because 1 star. This argument, this should be near the top of your RFD. The performance by the political activist Jimmy Boggs exposes the reality of not only how democracy functions, but how the affirmative functions. You're affirming your decision around what the app does for the black American population. Second is our counter-interpretation that you should be a critical intellectual test with evaluating the best educational strategy. This creates the best form of debate because you are able to reject teams based on anti-black discourse that comes before their fairness. Third is that they can see the U.S. justice have a chance to force this debate to be about metaphysics. It's not about the ethos the app is for, but rather about the metaphysical aspects of the criticism that the app ignores that they say this debate is about in the plan, but if we win the plan itself as anti-black discourse, that's a reason to reject them. Fourth is that they consider the current anti-ethics evidence in the previous speech don't value a new one in our answer. This means that the ethics of the affirmative not only reside in whiteness, but it's your job to start from an ontological entity of blackness when invalidating your decision, and they can't win a fairness argument when they concede the one in our answer. The fairness is always determined by the white majority, and they don't have an integral link to our form of education because it's their form of education that we've won as being anti-black, and their Barmer scenario analysis argument is there. SOS for the affirmative in this debate, but it's not offense for them. This argument is just that a net benefit because it allows nuances in public health to see as scenarios. We don't prevent them, but rather critique the discourse in which they present the app scenario. There a few steps behind. They make this argument it's about what the world would look like if the plan happened, but a world with the same metaphysics and ontological violence. That's why the alternative comes first on the permutation. The permutation is the worst metaphysical strat. Any implementation, the alternative discourse entails rejecting your focus, and you can't embrace both because when we deconstruct the signifiers of the family, the app doesn't make sense anymore because nobody can articulate familial possession. This is a key drop argument for why the perm fails because it literally suffers out of their metaphysical categories. They say metaphysics condemns people who are suffering to death, but they don't get help by things like reading the 1AC. They say reject attention policing. They should independently lose this debate because of this argument, because it's quite literally setting a dangerous precedent that black arguments are different forms of attention policing, and that black arguments don't have a place within the debate space, which is an independent reason why you should be able to reject them. This also makes all the case arguments about disconscious racism, and it's an independent reason why you should reject them in this bad model of endorsing something in the finals of the TOC. You don't want to be the judge who endorsed Peninsula TW saying reject attention policing. They extend this Gordon card back contingency, but there's no realistic semiotics argument. They also concede the Jackson evidence that says that certain scholars have to assume the position of the human is, i.e. Gordon, so he's not actually writing to people particularly endorse the affirmative, but rather playing devil's advocate, they say racism destabilizes institutions, but it's the other way around. That institutions are able to create racism in opposition to themselves, so that anti-blackness gives racism gives those institutions credence, which is why the alternatives, deconstruction, and metaphysics come first.
Oh yeah. Like the cloth?
Yeah. Like, oh, it's budget.
Copy paste, thank God. I knew how to do that. Oh, that's like why I yeah. I mean, so, mine looks
I just taught myself how to do it.
that's really the key, right?
I also just the K over here.
The plan solves family planning globally. This solves hundreds of thousands of lives. It does not create an inaccessible definition of the family or entrench a dominant ontology. The history argument, a negative ballot, does not remedy all of anti-blackness, and the permutation does not disagree with black literature as a theory. Their politics of recognition argument is new in the 2NR and contradicts the thesis of their Wilderson argument. The why civil society has coherence argument will be answered by the Gordon stuff and the Zanotti stuff, which will be explained below. The natal alienation kinship link about excluding the family. We did not create an immutable definition of the family. It was just that there are two consensual and willing partners to engage in some. That does not mean that the violence and the trauma of slavery or even the present have no application, or that black people cannot believe in that. It's not inaccessible. And our Roberts evidence read in the TOC says that because it is freedom is a cognition, it proves that we can still apply that to black people. Family structure also existed before the slave trade, which proves that we can apply some definition of the family independent of constructing it in opposition to the blackness, to blackness. It's a stretch to say that slavery is so strong of an ontological category that it means that nothing can be defined against outside of its relationship to blackness. We can still define families in relation to the LGBT population, single people, or nothing at all. Our Zanotti evidence and the Barnett card, which was the 2EC or the 1EC and 2EC card, says that there are many types of violence, and the pursuit of one ontological definition to apply to all categories is a flawed philosophical strategy. It authorizes ethical violence in the name of their philosophical purity, i.e. in this context allowing hundreds of thousands of people to die while claiming that we don't disrupt some ontological category. There are specific exceptions, and things can be defined ontologically in relationship to themselves or by other vectors of violence, i.e. aesthetics, etc., which was not contested in the 2EC card or that 1AC piece of evidence. The permutation also solves this because it injects doubt about our definitions. Our 1AC from the 1AC crossings, we said that this definition was not immutable. It was not some ontologically incontestable idea but rather something that is susceptible to change, i.e. the permutation, which would allow that unflinching analysis. And it's not a flinch to suggest that our definition wasn't perfect from the get-go, but rather amenable to change, i.e. as per Zanotti, the next argument that the contraceptives are population control is a conservative tactic that denies reproductive health to millions and is disproven. This is also a metaphor, not a link argument. Contraceptives are not bullets. Then that's a stretch to suggest that the metaphysics argument, all the Zanotti stuff I did above answers this, as does the permutation, because it allows us to inject that metaphysical doubt into the 1AC. The Gordon card, I'll extend that here. We have defined the relationship of ontology by anti-black racists, which is an illogical way to do so. Racism is the combination of power and some sort of discrimination, which means that it is created and sustained by institutions, not ontology. So institutions create racism, not ontology creating those institutions. If they're right that slavery is so powerful as an act that can restructure society, then specific acts can deconstruct that ontological category, and proves that we solve. They have staked this on, if we have hinged some definition of reality on an imperfect ontology, then we have entrenched it or made things work. That's not true. Our permutation could be imperfect, but that doesn't mean we make things worse. In fact, though we still have made material conditions better and we didn't change ontology, does not mean we have made the world a terrible place. The framework, or the K proper, the debate democracy arguments, the permutation is also a critique of democracy. It recognizes the failures of American liberal theory and democratic protections, and recognizes our necessity to do so. Also, this is inconsistent with their alt because it suggests that we should reinvigorate democracy, which is not any of their arguments. The framework stuff proper, we get to where F, they've dropped that it's the central point of all of our arguments. Their educational model is contingent on our ability to contest, which proves that fairness is not whiteness, but rather a prerequisite to more in-depth forms of education. Metaphysics might be important, but the intersection of public health advocacy and metaphysics in an industry discussion that's pedagogically valuable and proves our framework can include theirs. In fact, the purely metaphysical harmful model is harmful. That was the Zanotti and Barnett cards. The scenario analysis is our external offense and proves that we should be able to weigh our efforts pedagogically valuable to pose the question, what would the world look like if the government did this policy, and the consequences, benefits for students and teachers on how to organize these policies to support, especially in the context of reproductive health, because we have been failed by the educational system's top line and re-entrenches a dominant strategy. The Curry anti-ethics thing was answered by all of our ontology stuff, and our framework does not prevent them from critiquing dominant educational models, etc. They do preclude this scenario analysis thing because they have the central debate entirely on metaphysics, which prevents us from discussing reproductive health and re-entrenches a culture of stigma, which is unethical and turns their offense. Now, the permutation, they said you can't do both because it's a signifier of family. You don't need a family to have reproductive health services. Rape, etc. are all examples of people that are rape victims also need reproductive health services, and disproves their argument. And all our arguments about why things aren't always defined in relationship to other things but can be defined in and of themselves proves the we should lose because of attention policing argument. It wasn't that we shouldn't talk about anything else. It means that we shouldn't say that only one thing matters and is a defense of the permutation. It's a stretch to suggest this is a voting issue. Our Greenwald evidence is a defense of the permutation because it allows our critique of democracy, etc., while also incorporating the strategy of reproductive health service, which saves hundreds of thousands of lives and does not entrench a dominant ontology.
The silence. Tweets.
Yeah.
We just had Risha. Just had it.
Go ahead, cheese.
Thanks to everybody for coming. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. The winner on a 3-0 is the neg for the
Congrats to both teams for reaching into the finals of the TOC. That's like a pretty big thing. And regardless of win or lose, this was a fantastic debate, and it was an honor to judge. So I thank you all for taking, I guess, maybe a risk on a younger judge to judge it. So thank you for that. Do you all want the short and sweet version or the long version?
Medium?
Sure. Okay. The way I end up viewing the debate, I guess, in a long term is I think that this Curry argument is never properly answered throughout the entirety of the debate. That's not to say it wasn't answered, but I don't think it's dealing with the particularities of how anti-ethics would function in a world of comparing different metaphysical entities. So, I guess start with the framework debate. I ultimately think it's kind of a wash in terms of I think metaphysical questions should be important because they're intrinsic to the app's advocacy, because given the nature of fiat, even if I do weigh let's say your methodological impacts, the educational impacts to those things are important as well, and it gives the most clash for comparing offense on both sides. So I think that's the most fair interpretation of the debate world to default to, because that's the only way to evaluate offense on both sides in a fair and predictable way. So given that, I think that there's two isolated offense for both sides. The affirmative has two impacts I think that they're winning. One is the scenario planning or scenario planning stuff, and second is the healthcare education stuff. And I think the negative is winning a Virgo impact, as well as a reason why metaphysical focus is good, particularly in the instance of Black individuals, given the nature of civil society and abjection. So I think those are offense winning on both sides, so then I start going through how do I compare these two things. I ultimately end up concluding that even if you win your contingency arguments, i.e. if you win Zanotti, Barnett, Gordon, etc., those things don't deal with how Black individuals experience the world, i.e. there can be contingencies when regarding to institutions or violence, etc., but I think the neg is making a particular claim about how Black individuals relate to the act of democracy, relate to the act of civil society that narrows away from these like broader critiques of institutional politics, etc., which makes me read Curry in a more favorable fashion for them, because anti-ethical decision making is the only way to decide how to weigh impacts in the world of anti-black violence. I also think it's problematic that the performance is never directly dealt with by the affirmative, because I think it gives them a lot of these like overarching examples for like social death, etc., that would outweigh any contingency claims made by the Gordon or Burnett or Zanotti evidence, because they're much more particular and they're much easier for me to hang my hat on and how to frame the worlds of impacts. So given that, I think that this semiotics explanation as well as medial alienation links give more credence to the vertigo impact that would inevitably outweigh the ability to create scenarios or have healthcare education, because those forms of education that the affirmative is winning happens in an anti-black world that would be an unethical thing to endorse.
So you said the natalism link and the what?
Semiotics link. Like,
and the semiotics link?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to let everyone have it. I have some questions.
Of course.
They might first, obviously.
Yeah, I agree with really all of that. I think the AF's prioritization of sort of non-domestic issues over sort of the U.S.'s own problems as anti-black and props up a violent system. It's not that contraceptives or bullets so much as just the idea that the AF is a good idea because it gives contraceptives and thus the ability to plan your family, presumes that everybody has access to that, which they don't, and I think that that is sort of the argument that they're winning, not just like literally contraceptives or bullets. And so they're winning that maybe we should worry about sort of like other impediments to family planning that exist in the United States, i.e. like the fact that like people's sons are dying constantly when they're black, before we sort of deal with family planning issues in other countries. Does the app help some families maybe get better access to family planning? Yes, maybe. I thought the impact calculus could have been a lot better on this, and both the 1 year and the 2 year, and this would have helped quite a bit. I think you need to be way more offensive on not just like, it's not a bad idea still to help other people in other countries, but more like it is an obligation that we should also have to do that. And sort of framing it more like that, and much more on that question would be useful. You like sort of mentioned this at various points in the debate, but it's not, I think, nearly as strong and powerful as it needed to be. I agree a lot on the framework debate. I thought it was kind of a wash, but I also think that even if you win that scenario planning is good, I don't think that is sort of a reason why they still haven't won, that the app is not. Is still bad and props up an anti-black system, and that in a world in which obviously like us voting AF does not lead to any sort of actual family planning action abroad, it is perhaps more important to sort of focus on the question of anti-blackness and the system that the AF endorses. I also just like real quick this Greenwald card about like attention policing or whatever. I didn't end up having to really like think about this as an independent voter, but I did take a quick read, and this card's kind of messed up. Like, I mean, it's certainly just like, hey, don't call us out. I mean, it's like the worst form of just like, hey, we're trying to help, like, don't call us out. I mean, it's just, I read the card and it was super white. Really, it just was. And so if I had to think about that for a really long time, I feel like I would have been a little sympathetic to the negatives argument. I do think that it maybe could have been, maybe do it at the top of the twinner or near the top, so you have a little more time to explain an impact to it, because otherwise it's like hard to put like to decide an entire debate just based on one card. Right? If you're gonna make that a thing, it's got to be like a big thing. Otherwise, it's hard
so
to win.
why is it so bad?
So this card is just like.
I mean, it says that my understanding of it is that it says that progressives shouldn't assume that because other people have different goals that there's some kind of like bias behind it, right?
Yeah, but this card is like
sort of the claim to actually make, perhaps, but you know.
This card is like. It's like poor us for getting called out for having some sort of privilege.
Well, I mean, I guess if they.
That's sort of like the tone of the.
I guess if they win the critique, then then perhaps like we deserve to be called out, and this card wouldn't get us anywhere. But
so like, it's also like this card wasn't necessary to be read. So given that, I think it's even just like more like why.
But I think it's more like the point of it is to question whether having different priorities is a link. Right?
Yeah, but the way in which it does so, I understand this, but the way in which it does so is just like, I mean, the card is just like, people call us out. I mean, I can even go back and read quotes.
It's really okay. I mean,
I can go back and read quotes. I mean, I only spent like 30 seconds reading this card because I already had sort of decided to go for other reasons, but it was literally just like,
And then it wasn't in your decision, and so it's like I shouldn't make it. I just like you talked about it kind of strongly. So
No, that's
I just wanted to know. Like,
yeah. I just think like the tone of the card is very much like for us for getting called out.
I think in the future just err towards not reading it, just make the arguments instead, because the arguments don't really need evidence to be made.
Yeah.
The idea that you shouldn't focus on one thing necessarily all the time.
Okay, so for me, at the end of the debate, there are kind of two central questions. I think the first is how I ought to understand the impact arguments that are being advanced by each team and the relevance of those impacts, in particular in this debate. And then second, what the efficacy of the ballot is in terms of addressing the various impact arguments that have been advanced. I think that the kind of first thing, in terms of understanding the impacts, I thought that the neg is actually winning a fairly strong argument that anti-black racism is a structural feature of civil society. I think that the best pushback you have on this is your Gordon piece of evidence. There are two problems, at least for me, in terms of evaluating Gordon in the context of Wilderson's theorization of anti-black violence structure in civil society. The first is a small technical consideration, which is that you can see that Gordon is simply positing this humanist perspective. It's like the short card there, I think it's Johnson is the evidence, which describes Gordon's scholarship in the context of an overall humanist arc, I guess simply that is embedded within, it kind of like encloses, right, the theorization within the anti-black structuring of civil society. So for me, I don't think Gordon is the best response that you have, at least in terms of how it's debated too. I do think the evidence itself is excellent, but I thought that the deployment of the evidence could have been better in later speeches, especially like the 2AR. I thought it was more defensive and not really offensively construed. So ultimately for me, I think that they win maybe a bit stronger kind of metaphysical claim than Risha or Caitlin are giving them, which is that in general, anti-black racism there's some fundamental premise which much of the affirmative boils up from. And so then, the second consideration, which is, well, what is the efficacy of the ballot and how can the ballot go about addressing some of the impacts or harms that are associated with both the affirmative and I guess the arguments that the negative also advances. So the first thing that I thought about is this performance argument. I thought that it was unfortunate that in the 1AR especially, you don't really on point address the extension of performativity. It's always, it's always difficult to know what you should do in the 2AC. I think that in the 2AC you should at least discuss a little bit, or a cross-ex moment would be sufficient, maybe a couple sentences here and there. But then the block had a very strong defense of and even explanation for how the performance of their alternative in the 1NC and even advancing them as the TOC champions would be a rupture in anti-black violence that structures civil society, because this space is also associated with anti-black racism in civil society. So there's something that the ballot can do to address the harm that they've identified. But there's nothing that the ballot could do to address the harm that you all have identified, which is that millions of people don't have access to reproductive health in China. So that just sets up, I guess, the rest of the evaluation for the criticism, etc. I think that they do win, so you can still win, this isn't damning for you all. But I think that then if they win a link argument and that the permutation can't address the alternative in the same way that they do, that ultimately that means I would have to vote negative in order to address the problems that they've identified. So first, I think they do win a couple of link arguments, some that aren't as strong as others. They've talked about them a little bit. There's this focus on Chinese problems, not domestic problems, which I guess occludes our understanding of domestic anti-black violence. I thought this argument was good in the block, very quick in the 2NR, possibly drop in the 2AR. So it's, it's kind of like floating out there, but not a determiner of the link argument necessarily. The second is this metaphysical concept of the family. I thought was explored fairly thoroughly in cross-ex. I thought you all had the best pushback on this. In particular, I thought the 2AR pushback on it was fairly good in terms of contextualizing your answers, in the understanding that they have this historical assessment of slavery as identifying this concept, and you're like, no, that's not how family works, etc. And then third is this reproductive health is bullets and population control, and then 4 is the United States is generally a human rights abuser, and so we should address our domestic concerns first, etc. So I kind of thought the reproductive health link and then this U.S. federal kind of human rights abuser links were sufficient, at least for me, to understand the political project of the AF as being one that could advance anti-black racism, etc. So then I think that the permutation, while it maybe could address some of these problems, the way that the neg debated it, ultimately I think they win, that it's incompatible with the affirmative. So the strategies that Wilderson evidence outlines, unflinching paradigmatic analysis, I think that the Curry evidence impacts means that the way that the alternative would ultimately be combined with the approach of the affirmative would be disadvantageous in attempting to address the harm that they have. So then the last concern or consideration I have, I suppose, is whether or not the framework argument would be strong enough on the part of the affirmative to simply say, well, the only thing I really evaluate is the implementation of the plan and not, let's say, right, the effect of the debate or the performance that happens in the space or even the scholarship of the 1AC. Ultimately, I don't determine that the way I should evaluate the debate is simply plan implementation with the causal results. You know, does the plan do good things or bad things, for a couple of reasons. The first, I think, is that you all are advancing this fairness argument, I think, reasonably well, but the neg is pushing back in a couple of ways that I don't think you have a response to. The first is this fairness is configured by white majorities. I thought y'all are kind of like, well, that may be true in certain circumstances, and contextually it's a little bit different, but, you know, that there could be a type of fairness that's, you know, distinct from those things. I thought y'all should have been much stronger on this component, which is no, the type of fairness we are discussing here is the capacity to reason through, right, specific problems, and the debating process that we've identified cannot occur in a situation where we don't at least suspend disbelief in the process of policymaking. And then I thought the second component that would have really helped your framework argument in the end that didn't really make it in the 2AR or even the 1AR is this notion of progress and whether or not progress is possible within civil society. So the two are kind of imbricated, right, the way that we understand policymaking and whether or not progress is possible. I thought that the neg pushback was decent but not excellent on this in the block, but then the argument was lost really in the 1AR and the 2AR, not through, you know, lack of contestation, I guess, but just you didn't advance the argument very strongly, which means ultimately I kind of conclude that the policy-making approach of the affirmative isn't perhaps the best framework or framing for understanding the way that I should evaluate the impacts associated with it, and that the ballot itself can only address anti-black racism as a structural feature of civil society, where we orient ourselves as intellectuals rather than, I guess, as a policymaker with a supposed hypothetical governmental evaluation.
So yeah, and I don't think they're necessarily even advancing the argument to be that, like, preclusive. It was just more of like, the app matters and should be able to have some extent that we like challenge the, you know, that there's not much of a link, and that's the reason the firm is desirable rather than just, you know, the same. I guess my only question, this is kind of question, you know, for everyone, because Will, like, it seemed like you were saying, you were like there was this floating kind of maybe a little bit in the 2AR, not in the 2AR, about that it's not a focus on domestic problems at home, which seemed like you didn't, like, you know, was a big part of the debate. And then there were two other ones that you then went on to kind of explain why our answers that we made that you thought were good, and then you said that there was, but then you said that I don't know why. So you didn't really give me a reason why they weren't, like why those were good links, and then said those were what you voted on.
Well, I guess it goes back to the solvency or efficacy of the ballot too, right? So there's something else about how if they win even a small link argument, I guess what I'm saying is you all are playing decent defense on the link arguments.
I guess
let me finish. If they win one of them, right, or even the capacity for one of them, and the alternative to address something like the link argument. So in other words, if the app posits us in an anti-black manner or orientation towards policymaking, and the ballot could address that because there's something about voting for McDonogh which ruptures civil society in this way, right? Then even that small link argument is sufficient of a reason to reject the affirmative, because voting affirmative has no positive benefit associated with it, right? Do you see? So it's not just enough to play link defense. You also have to have an offensive component, where voting affirmative would be a positive good rather than simply not as bad as the neg suggests.
Well, I understand that. I guess like, so the links, to me, like the first one about the focus on, you know, that we're not like about what's at home, you know. I think that, you know, that like you said, it's not a big part of the 2AR, it's not really a big part of the debate, and I think the card that you didn't like, whatever, is kind of like, it's not what we don't talk about, you know. There's other priorities, but that doesn't mean we don't care on the same side, whatever, maybe the wording wasn't so good, we could have made it analytically. And there's a perm, right, which probably do a lot to mitigate the risk of what we don't talk about, you know, because it's something that, you know, if it's something we could have talked about but didn't, right? And then there's like family. I mean, the organization we fund has family in the name of it. We only say family planning. I don't know if we actually, you know, advance a metaphysical concept of family I thought all the arguments you said about like the answers to that, about why those were good, maybe they're defense, but you know, I'm not really sure why that's a link still at the end of the debate. And then the other one was about human rights, or about population control or something, which I think that's offense for us probably by the end of the debate, because they won't quite defend that like Planned Parenthood isn't good and that like it's not, and that's kind of like where half the offense is coming from, because there's really two advantages. One is saving lives. The second is challenging the sort of conservative dogma that access to contraception is bad because it prevents life or whatever, right? So I guess what I'm trying to think is like, I understand like, you know, every explanation that you're all giving except for the link, you know, but it seemed to me that it was kind of like they were kind of searching for one, you know, I mean, I know it's like new app, different things, but it's like, I thought that these, each of these things were kind of like a stretch. They weren't really a part of any like the RFDs didn't, I think like a lot of the other things the things that you voted on that were important, assumed that there's a link. So I guess like, I guess that's the question about like which of those did you find compelling and why? Where did my view of like where that went off differ from like what each of you thought?
Didn't feel like I was searching for a link, to be honest. I didn't ever feel even close to that. Yeah, you have some like defense, but also this is not, I mean, you call it a link of omission. I don't think it is.
The first one, the one about
the like domestic versus international.
Yeah.
I mean, so like there's link of omission, sure, but not all link of omissions are literally just like you didn't talk about this and that's it, right? It's also like the fact that you didn't talk about this is a choice that you should be held to for certain reasons, right? And that's a little, I think you're not giving really enough credit in that sort of sense, especially given some of, I think, these like, what Will was talking about in terms of the role of the ballot and the way that what it can and cannot sort of deal with. And so I think that link of omission is, I mean, I guess that omission is like matters more than than the kind of credit you're giving it. I also think like, for example, your conception of family. I realized that they called it your conception of family, but the way it was explained, the way I interpreted it, was like your conception of family planning is what they were critiquing to a certain extent, really. As in like, I mean, they also have like sort of an idea of a conception of family, but the idea, again, kind of what I said, the idea that people have the ability to plan families or can have that ability once we have access to contraceptives is sort of also what they're critiquing, right? So the premise again that everybody has sort of equal access to family planning in a world of in a world of the AF or in the status quo was another link, and so it wasn't really like just the concept of family so much as just
the AF advances the idea that in the status quo everyone has equal access to it.
Well, no, I think that the AF advances the idea that there is sort of well, yes, to a certain extent. I mean, the act doesn't literally say like everybody has equal access to family planning, but the fact that the act approaches family planning with the sort of method of contraceptives, I think does sort of forward the idea that contraceptives are a major way to resolve family planning for everybody in an equal sort of way. Yes.
At least my stab at that interpretation was that it's not so much that the AF says universal or family planning is a universal thing that can occur, but rather the process of saying that family planning is a, not human right, because that's not the word you all use, but like a fundamental right that everyone should have access to, one, presumes that everyone has access to that. There isn't conditions within society that prevent people from planning or being able to plan families in certain ways, or like have this like, not absolute, but like stable predictability of the idea of like I can say yes or no to having a family that doesn't take into the conditions of black individuals in the long run, as well as just like the basic conception of a family presumes that you can create history or have these consensual relationships between two people that cannot be violated by anyone else. Like it presumes a subject whose existence cannot be violated by anyone else, and I think if they're winning the thesis of both natal alienation and gratuitous violence as well as the Curry stuff, I don't think that those things are possible, and I think that's a stronger link than it maybe could have been in this debate. Like I think there needs to be more pushback about like these ideas of like gratuitous violence and natal alienation.
The links are framed, right, through the understanding that we have of how society is constituted. So in other words, it magnifies the problematic portion of the AF if they win that your focus, for example, on the family is only relevant for certain subjects who are constituted not through anti-black violence, right? But rather through a different form of, the way that their will, there's evidence that he describes it as there's a difference between a sentient being and a human being. And so human beings get to have the luxury of family planning, right? While individuals subjected to anti-black violence don't have that luxury. So the link argument, while small, possibly is much larger in the kind of consideration of the framing of the link. That's at least how I interpret the kind of like link in the context of the debate. So I have more thorough engagement with the framing, approach of the negative. Their kind of theorization, I suppose, of civil society would have been more successful in then reducing the magnitude of the link arguments and perhaps inflating the impact of the affirmative.
Yeah, I wrote down in my notes for the decision for how I was going to give it that it was the semiotics, which I just wrote as shorthand for like this, theory of black ontology plus these links is what made the story. Like you can't have one without the other. Like your wing defense only really makes a lot of sense in the world which they're not winning their structural theory.
And the structural theory. Does it have to be? No, I'm sorry. Does it have to be related to those links? There was a part of the debate that was like, is it everything? And are these specific things in opposition to blackness, right? And then that was a big part of the 1AR and 2AR. So do you think that there has to be some? Do you think that they have to win that they are, or just there's some other, some explanation that can explain the impacts they've isolated? Does that make sense? Because I think that there was a big part of the debate that was like, is everything in opposition to something else, or can things stand on their own? And if they are in opposition, could there be things in opposition to other things other than blackness? He posited some possibilities, pointed out that the conception of family before these things, that assumes that we're committed to advancing some kind of metaphysics of family rather than just funding an organization that happens to have the word family in its name.
Yeah, I think I said this in my decision, but I think that you all are winning that contingency can exist, but you're not answering the particularities applied to the black body. I think that it's a very big problem that in the AF speeches, these things are discussed kind of in the abstract or only in the context of how the plan will work mechanistically or instrumentally, and not in the context of what does that mean for black folk or the black body? What does it mean for the ontology of blackness? Those things are not discussed, and I think those things need to be discussed. The parts of the Gordon card that you're going for are just contingency matters. We can think about violence differently as it applies to different people, but that's not answering the negatives argument. They've tailored the argument very specifically. They're not making Wilderson anti-blackness structures every other form of oppression, because they don't have to in this debate. They're only talking about what it means for black individuals.
Thank you.
Great job, y'all.
Yeah.